Dobar dan svima. Hello everyone. I had my presentation prepared in English, and since I've seen we have English-speaking guests in the auditorium, I'll continue with the presentation in English. So, we'll be talking about hybrid apps, and since this is a development stage, we'll be more concentrated on the development part of the story, while we'll still touch some business perspectives at the end of the presentation. My name is Josip Bišćan, and I'm the managing partner at Infinum. Infinum is a development and design agency, and we do stuff for mobile and web platforms. We do the whole, both the design and the development, so we actually do the whole process of building an app from the beginning, from getting to know the client, getting to know what they need, figuring out what's the best way to fulfill their goal, and eventually get into development and production with their product. So our areas of expertise cover both design and development of apps, of web applications, of mobile applications, of various types of software that's custom-made for our customers. And we primarily target mobile and web platforms, even though we have done some stuff in other areas as well. Talking about platforms, we have different services we offer, and in that perspective, we're mostly concentrated on iOS and Android in the mobile development, primarily because they cover most of the market, and our customers, our clients, don't find it interesting to develop for other technologies. While they are, some of them are rising, but still not enough to make a big percentage. On the other hand, there is the backend development for web applications and the front-end development, so HTML, JavaScript, and so on. And of course, in order to support any kind of development for going into production, you always need a testing team. So the quality assurance is something that we've worked much on, and we developed a team that takes care of that part. So it's not just developers writing the code and testing it themselves, so-called F5 testers. They're actually running it through some integration tests, unit testing, and use case scenarios provided and created with the clients. What have I actually been doing? Before becoming the managing partner at Infinum, I've been doing a lot of different stuff with regards to development. So starting with PHP, back in the days when it was popular and a good technology, well, good as it can be. Later I moved to Ruby on Rails, which is something that we actually currently do at Infinum, and which is our main technology for web development. I also worked with Java applications, worked on building mobile applications for Java phones, so for feature phones like old Nokia phones and so on. Worked with various frameworks for developing applications on mobile. So, for example, Sencha Touch is one of the frameworks, using different types of wrappers to build those applications on different platforms like Adobe Air. And also using frameworks like PhoneGap in order to get HTML applications into mobile phones. Now, why am I pointing this out? It's not to brag or something, it's to show you that these are all the technologies I've actually worked in, and this is why I'm talking about hybrid apps. So, hybrid. Talking about hybrid, we have a colleague here later that has a fully electric car. His company is building the fully electric car, but hybrid is something that people mostly heard about talking about cars. So what does it mean it's hybrid? It has an electrical engine and it has a gasoline engine. And both of them work and coexist, supplementing each other. Now, with regards to applications and with regards to development, when it comes to applications, again, we have two parts in the mix. One part is the native development, which is you have to have something native, otherwise it wouldn't be hybrid. And the other part is the other component that allows you to build the application, and that's web development. That's something that's more known to more people. It's broader, and we'll get into details on each of them. So as far as native development goes, there are several pros and cons on doing either purely native development or doing purely web development. And the hybrid model is something that will cover off most of the problems on each side. So as far as pros are concerned for native development, you can have the best possible user experience if you develop purely in native technologies. That's something that no hybrid app or no web app can accomplish with either set of available technologies. They can come close, but they can't actually build anything that good. Anything that's related to each platform you're building for. So if you're building for iOS, access to gyroscope, to positioning, access to phone book, or any other application is something you can't have from a web app, but that's something that native apps do have access for. And they can actually request permissions to do something on Android, or you can allow location services or something like that in your native apps. There is a lot better visibility for an app when it's available in a store. So for all of the native apps, you have App Store for iOS applications, you have Google Play for Android phones, you have Windows Marketplace for Windows Phone applications, and so on. And in each of those stores, you have your app, and you can actually advertise the app. While with the web application, if someone is using that on a phone, there's not actually something that you have an icon for. You can pin websites to home screen, but it's not actually the same experience as having an app that you can actually advertise. The problem with native development is if you have to cover multiple platforms, and you usually do because you at least have two platforms to cover, that's iOS and Android, in that case, you'll have to reinvent the wheel for each of these applications. So you do know the business logic, but as far as user interface is concerned, you'll definitely end up building it twice. And while that might be a good thing because you're building it for each platform's own native look and feel, that is a problem with regards to cost, and that's something that's especially important for your clients that might be interested in reducing the cost of development, because they're not interested in developing something 5 times over. They just want it developed, and they want it for a small price as they can get it for. Also, somewhat a problem for native development is slow release cycle. So whenever you make a change, you have to create a build, you have to upload that build into the store. They have to, it has to go through their quality assurance or whatever process there is, and it takes at least a couple of hours, and with the App Store it takes a couple of days to get your app approved. And if you had one bug, in order to fix it after it's gone into production, you'll have to wait a couple of days to get it published. So the release cycle can be really slow, and especially problematic if you have any errors in your applications, which you shouldn't have, but it always happens. Now, with regards to native apps, so this is an example how different mobile platforms look like. So they have different look and feel, and that's why you have to build 3 times for these 3 platforms. As far as web development is concerned, web is becoming a universal platform. So I know the point below which says browser standards will counter me, but web is something that can be displayed on pretty much anything that is connected to internet. And you can always get a website running, and that's something that's available to everyone. It's good because you have a known set of user interface elements which can be used to deliver the user experience to your visitors. And that's great because they usually work pretty much the same on each device you're using it on. So you're getting pretty much a good user experience on wherever you open your web page, and you built it only once. So in that case, you don't have to build it multiple times. You have code reusability, or actually not writing the same code multiple times at all. And you have pretty much seamless updates, because whatever you publish to the website, it's available right at that moment. So you don't have to wait for several days for some QA process or anything like that. The problem with the web is it has lower visibility. You have to enter the URL, you have to get someone to type in that URL. You don't find it on the App Store, and that's where people usually tend to find apps that they don't even know about. So in an example this morning, there was the Održan app, and if you wanted to find održanapp.com, I'm not sure if you would ever find it that easily, but if you went to App Store and you said, okay, category tourism, Održan, that app, if it has a lot of downloads, would probably have a lot of, it would be on top of the rank, and you would be able to find it and actually download it. So it has better visibility. With web apps, you're limited to what browser supports. So if the browser doesn't have access, and it doesn't have access to phone book, gyroscope, location services, or anything like that, you won't be able to actually get any of that information, and you won't be able to use it, and you won't be able to personalize the app for that guest. So it will be harder to provide a unique experience for them. So as far as web is concerned, the most popular way of doing something for mobile devices or for any devices is doing a responsive web page. So a responsive web page is a web page that's built once. It has different styles that are used, and it breaks down on different screen sizes. So it either hides some elements or shows more elements depending on the screen real estate you're working with. And then with native having its own problems and web having its own problems, what comes to the rescue is something that's called a hybrid app, which kind of gets the best of both worlds. It gets you the exposed access to some native features and access to the device itself from the native perspective, as well as building the actual app only once from the web perspective. How can you actually build this? So, in terms of native development, there are several ways you can go here. You can just use a bare-bone browser shell. So basically what you're doing is taking the system browser off the device and just using it to display a web page. That's something that's not encouraged, and actually Apple is starting to refuse that kind of apps, which are just displaying the web page. Their argument is you have a web browser if you want to open a web page. So it's necessary to actually do something more with the app to actually have a reason to do this. An improved way of doing this is actually having some native components and then introducing the web view, the browser shell for displaying the app itself. So this kind of native components can be some different dialogues, toolbars, third-party libraries which are used for some, I don't know, facial detection or whatever, and then they're sending that information towards the web app through an exposed interface. And that exposed interface is actually the third part, which brings the most functionality to the web app. That's the native bridge, where you build a bridge between the web app and the native app, exposing basically the web to everything that a native app could do. Of course, for each of the platforms, you'll probably need to do all of that work a couple of times, but that'll be a minimum set of functionalities, while the main core of your business logic will be what's in the web app. Now, as far as the web is concerned, you can go pretty well with just having the responsive web page, and that's it. You would probably customize it a bit so it looks better on different platforms. But what brings the most benefit are single-page applications. So these are applications using HTML5 technology, so that means JavaScript, that means CSS, and a lot of other HTML5 elements which can help in this process. And they allow you to build rich applications, pretty similar to their native counterparts, while still being on the web. And of course, the third point in my previous slide, exposing the native bridge, is where single-page applications integrate the best through these native integrations, where, I don't know, you have a screen where you scan someone's driver's license. So this is a web page where you click a button, and that button actually opens the screen from the native part. Using the web view is pretty much opening a browser shell on a phone, which then displays the app, which is running on a web server. Now, as far as technologies are concerned, on the native part, something that's, you can always develop your own native app through just developing it through standard procedure. But that's something that's not really common because you're, again, reinventing the wheel. There are technologies available to do that instead of you. So I think currently the best thing to do that is the PhoneGap framework, which you can use then to build whatever you need through your web app. PhoneGap has a lot of different plugins which can then be used to access different parts of the phone and move on. Then there we have Accelerator Titanium, which is another framework, not as popular as PhoneGap, but still doing pretty much the same purpose. And then I was talking mostly about mobile apps, but when we're talking about hybrid apps, we're not only talking about mobile apps, we're also talking about desktop. So for years we had problems with compatibility between desktop apps on Linux, on Windows, on Mac, and with the hybrid apps becoming a hit on mobile, they're also becoming a hit on desktop as well. So what you can do is actually take some of the frameworks used for that. So for example, app.js, Node WebKit, or Electron, and then you can wrap your web app inside a wrapper and distribute it on different platforms. Now, how do we actually load that web page? One option is actually just bundling in the web page you've built and providing it along with the package for the native app. In that case, the HTML is located within the resources of that app, and it behaves pretty much like opening a local file in a browser. And with each update, you'll still need to release a new native app because it's bundled in and it can't get to you through web. And the other solution is actually get it from a web server where of course, you need an internet connection, but if you've actually downloaded the app, you probably already have the internet connection, so that shouldn't be too much of an issue. And you can always get instant updates, and with regards to updates, you need to define a good caching policy, because if you don't have a good caching policy, then there can be a problem that someone still loads the old version because of some obsolete cache headers, which aren't refreshing the new web when it's loaded. When we're talking about web, as I mentioned earlier, you can do the simple responsive HTML and that's it, which is not as recommended as actually building a single page application. And if you're doing that, then you'll probably want to use a UI framework. So instead of actually building all the UI elements for yourself, you can reuse the existing set of components. There are several frameworks, and any of them is actually good to use. So I can't say that I would actually recommend each of them, because each of them is good for their own use and in their own specific case, and I don't think we have enough time to go into details on that. But what comes in here, if you don't need those specific UI elements, for example, if you don't need something that looks like mobile, the standard mobile user interface, or you want to build something different, you can actually just develop a pure web page using some standard technologies, and what comes in hand there is the JavaScript frameworks. So either you're using Backbone, Ember, Angular, React, or any other popular framework for JavaScript development, it'll do good, and you'll be able to build something and create a good application. Now, when it comes to choosing the right technology and the right way for your app, there are several factors in here. So you need to figure out what do you actually need, and then you'll be able to answer what kind of app to build. So if you need some device proprietary APIs, you might want to think about hybrid apps, because in this case that's a good way to actually have a web page and still get those APIs. If you want to have a native look and feel, you'll probably want to go for a native app, because the only way to get a real proper native look and feel is through a native app and their user interface elements. If you need some device-specific libraries, again, you can work with the hybrid app. If you need fast deployments, if you want to reduce costs, and it doesn't really mean that you'll reduce costs that much. I mean, you'll still have to build something, and you just won't have to build it 3 times again. So a part of the development will be cheaper. Later, it depends on the maintenance part. So as the native apps evolve, they still reuse the same user interface elements, and they will still be working on newer versions. While with web apps, if you build something and you don't update it through time, probably some of the features will become deprecated and you'll have to upgrade it or kill it. And of course, you need to see who is your target audience. So if your target audience is people who want to download apps, you definitely can't go with a web page. And if your target audience are people used to using native apps, people who will figure out the difference, who will see that little twitch when you're reloading the page or something like that, then it might be a better way to go with the native apps. In most cases, you're pretty much good with hybrid apps, and I think that would be a good way to go. Thank you. Any questions?
So, can you compare the development efforts for the hybrid app to the native app for one platform? So what kind of effort? Is it hard to do the native app or the native app?
Well, okay, so the question was what's the difference between developing a native app for one platform and a hybrid app for also one platform. If you're doing it only for one platform, it probably doesn't make much sense to go with hybrid, because you would probably want to build it native. But if you want to cover more platforms, and if you're connecting to a specific API or something, it might be easier if you have it all in one place. And then you build a hybrid app, and then you just build that little skeleton around it, and then you can reuse it. With regards to the amount of effort, I think if you're building it just for one platform, the amount of effort is pretty much the same. It depends on the development resource available, how well they know the platform they're working on, how well can they work with web apps, and how well are they in native development, and that's basically the answer on how much effort there is. If we're talking about going on multiple platforms, then you can have minimum effort on the native part, where basically a single person that knows at least a little bit of native development can do all of that, all of those wrappers, while a person doing web development can then build the whole app. And in that case, it minimizes the effort by, I would say, some 60%, 70% probably.
How do you think with compatibility with the older web browsers? I think on older Android versions, there are many 2-point something Android versions on the market. How does that work?
Okay, so the question was on the compatibility with older versions of web browsers on different devices. Yeah. Yeah, so this is a problem, and there is no actual way of fixing it. If you built an app before, when that version of Android or iOS was still available, you probably built to fix those issues that might come up, or some standards that aren't yet implemented, or something like that. But in case you're building it now and you want backwards compatibility, you'll have to work around it a lot. And it might take a lot of native development to actually fix some issues. But basically you need to see what are the statistics on the usage of those phones and what is your target audience. Because if your target audience are people who have a lot of Android phones, Android 2.3 or something like that, for whatever reason, then you need to target those people with your development. If you want to build a general app that most of the people will be able to download, then you can cover 4.4 and above, and you're good. So basically, you're always struggling with those compatibility issues.
Does this framework, do they have some kind of notification or something like that, some standard procedure, or your browser is full or something like that? Do they have that?
So when you're loading an app in a browser, opening each of these, opening an app built with some of these frameworks will probably, they'll definitely show, and you'll be able to use them in a way. Usually these frameworks cover these compatibility issues. They build it inside of their core part of the framework. And if you're talking about apps, when you have some native incompatibilities with previous versions of Android API or iOS, then it's a bit harder, because in that case those frameworks won't help you as much. You'll need to figure out the exact issues you have. For example, Android now started enforcing permissions. So all the apps that don't ask for permissions will be removed from Marketplace, something like that. And in that case, there is nothing for you to do other than upgrade the API version and actually resolve that issue. So it's something that it is an incompatibility between versions, but it's not something that you can handle through a framework.
I have a little bit of a tricky question perhaps, but if you look back at the 10 applications you made, what do you think the average development cost?
Okay, average development cost. Well, I can't answer that question. Basically, the biggest reason for that is that we're working for various clients, and apps can vary from as low as, I don't know, let's say some $5,000 to going to some bigger amounts, and it depends on the type of functionality, the amount of functionality in it, the business logic in it, and all the different parts. So it's hard to give you an average. A better answer would be if you have a specific question, then we can say, okay, this is in that grade. What is an application? Now it always depends. So in the version application, the example was that you would book something with the hotels. So hotels would need to open their APIs. If they don't have it standardized, you would probably have to have a middle layer standardizing all the APIs, and it builds a lot. So if they had a standard API and you're building against it, you're pulling all the information from one point that's already in there, then that app is not as costly, then it's probably somewhere around that lower point that I mentioned. I mean, you can always go lower. There is always the neighbor's kit that can build it free, and there are always companies coming into the marketplace that tend to come in low, and that's okay. I mean, they have to come in somehow, but at some point it gets to a certain quality versus money involved, invested.